Hello and welcome to another episode of the PropSwap podcast. We are your hosts, Ian Epstein
and Luke Pergande.
And we are also the founders of PropSwap, the first marketplace to buy and sell sports bets. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We've got a special episode for you. We will be counting down the top 5 stories of 2022 in the gambling world. No stake or swap. We are just going to recap what has been a crazy year in the sports betting space. So before we get into it, I thought I'd mention a couple honorable mentions that I think were worth mentioning, but we're not going to include in the top 5 list. The first one being Florida sports betting. A lot of this news went down earlier in the year, where basically it's just such a convoluted situation with the Seminole tribes, and they did have sports betting, but then it got blocked, and there are these compacts, and it's just a crazy thing. But for some of you may recall that Florida did have sports betting for a month or two, and then it's now been just caught up in the court system. So hopefully we'll have more news on that in 2023, but just not enough time to get into that. And then the other story, which we actually have touched on in previous episodes, is the Massachusetts sports betting situation, which is a mess for different reasons. There's this reporter that I follow on Twitter, Jessica Wellman, who's done a great job kind of covering some of these hearings. One of the Massachusetts commissioners literally asked how come sportsbooks couldn't offer betting on WWE, the scripted wrestling sport, if you could call it that. So, I mean, that's just one example of the confusion going on there, but we are hopeful that retail betting will be up and running shortly in Massachusetts, with online betting being up and running in time for March Madness. But once again, not enough time to get into that. That's not in our top 5. So without further ado, let's get into the list. Starting us off, number 5, it's everyone's favorite furniture salesman, Mattress Mac. He won $75 million from sportsbooks by betting Houston Astros World Series futures. Now, as you may or may not be aware of, this is all tied to promotions that he ran during the year that basically said if you buy a mattress or really any other piece of furniture from his stores in Texas, that they would be free if the Astros win. So while Mac did win $75 million from sportsbooks, he essentially gave it all back to his customers in refunds, which is incredible. I mean, I can't imagine how many families really need that money, and to get it all back as a refund is just incredible. And he's talked about how much that how much that city means to him. But I thought this was an interesting note. Because he is from Texas, so he does make a lot of his sports bets in Louisiana, which has legal sports betting. Texas, of course, does not. When reporting the November results, the Louisiana Game Control Board said that the state had a revenue loss of $27.6 million, and specifically said in part due to Mattress Mac's World Series winning. So the fact that the state lost $27 million in the month of November, and they attribute a lot of that to Mac's winnings is, I think, an incredible story. So the reason why I think this is number 5, I mean, not only is it the largest win in legalized U.S. sports betting history, $75 million, but I think it was just such part of the conversation around the World Series. I mean, everyone, whether you were rooting for him, against him, or had no rooting interest at all, I think everyone was kind of invested in the story. So, Luke, what did you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, he threw out the first pitch, right, for one of the games in Houston. He threw out the first pitch, so yes, it was not just a sports betting story. Mattress Mac he was part of the entire economy around that game. So, I mean, look, we're big fans of him. He makes big futures bets. Of course, we would support people making large futures bets. So he's going to do it year in and year out. Yeah, and I think you nailed it. Like, winning $75 million is incredible. I don't care if $75 million is changing hands from one person to another. It's still wild. Like, the fact that it showed up in the state's gaming report is it shows the magnitude of this. But yeah, it's interesting. But as with most of these big gambling stories, like, he basically laid it off. He's giving this right back to his customers by way of refunds for their furniture. So interesting for sure. We love more attention that on the industry, and him making large sports bets helps everyone understand sports betting more. Some Joe Schmo is watching the World Series who had never heard of futures betting or sports betting and isn't familiar with it. That's great. Great for the industry. He's a really nice guy. It was leaving a Philly to get in a fight with him, the Philly sports fans at the game at the bank. But it's an awesome story. And like I said, we met him at the conference, at the sports betting conference last summer. Really nice guy. So happy for him.
Yeah. And like you said, not only was it large sports wagers, but large futures wagers, which, we love to see. And yeah, it's not just some, anonymous whale at MGM betting $500,000 on the Giants. It's, he's out there, he's public. He takes the good with the bad. He's said that he's a gambler at heart. And so I think it was just a kind of a feel good story to get people more knowledgeable about sports betting. At the end of the day, yeah, it ended up being $75 million back in the pockets of I think good customers who really needed it. So definitely I think an important story this year. Number 4 is not great news, and it revolves around the closure of Fubo Gaming. Fubo Gaming was created when Fubo TV, which is a publicly traded company, acquired the company Vigtory, which was a yet-to-be-launched sportsbook aimed at offering low hold percentages. The strategy with this acquisition was to create a second screen experience that would link what the customers were streaming on Fubo TV, which of course carries a ton of different sports channels, with the sportsbook app, so the app could bring up the betting markets for whatever the game the customer's watching. So, for example, if you were streaming Eagles Cowboys on your TV and you had the Fubo Sportsbook app open, you would be able to it would pull up automatically that Eagles Giants betting market on your phone. The sportsbook operated in 3 states when it closed: Arizona, Iowa, and New Jersey. Arizona was their first state they launched in, and at the time of closure, they had 0.07% of the market share in that state. So, Luke, what were your thoughts on this the story when it broke?
How much time do we have? No. It seems similar to the Scores app, right? The Canadian sports schedules standings app. And the idea was, let's convert all of these existing big sports fans that we already have, and we're just going to convert them into sports bettors. It's easy. It's like, no, it's not that easy, because there's already existing apps that people love. The technology you're using better be so clean that the transition from app A onto app B is natural. And I think that's why the Score tripped up, is that their transition from the traditional Scores app, which I'm obsessed with, amazing app, onto the sports betting app just wasn't clean, and it wasn't a smooth transition. And this is, in this situation, it's not even the same device, right? You're going from TV to phone. And for that reason, I never understood why they thought they could gain market share if, and we'll get to some of the prices they paid to make a splash. Like, if you're going to run a really lean business and just not spend money on marketing, okay, like maybe you can just, be a 1% market share book and still turn a profit. But they were paying a ton of cash on market access fees, on advertising. They literally, and we'll talk about this, I'll let you break it, but they spent a lot of cash on team deals. Why don't you just talk about those two, and then we can kind of discuss the sides.
The other thing I was going to mention was that, I think people close to us, I definitely heard it from multiple people who were just very excited about this deal. I think they thought this was going to be this great combination of gambling on your television. And unfortunately, we were just not at the point yet. I think people somehow thought that you'd be watching Fubo on your TV, and then on the TV, you would be able to bet, which, again, A, I don't know who wants that, or who's begging to have that. And B, we're just not there yet from a regulatory standpoint where they're going to allow, live betting with your TV remote. And again, I'm not even so sure who wants that. So yeah, I agree. It's like, so you're saying I'm going to delete the DraftKings app because I watch my live sports on Fubo? Like that was a big leap. But yeah, so you mentioned this. And so, again, it'd be one thing if, hey, we're gonna incorporate sports betting into our paid streaming business, and we're gonna use that to acquire customers on the streaming thing, and we're not gonna put a bunch of money into advertising the sports book side of things. But that's not what happened. So a couple of these deals, right? In January, Fubo signed a deal with the Houston Dynamo that included a $10 million signing bonus plus $1 million a year in marketing. And this was all in preparation if Texas were to legalize sports betting. And if they did, then it turned into like even a bigger deal with like $15 million plus per year in requirements. Still not sure what's going to happen with that deal. But another deal they signed that has come out, and it's not a great look, is so Fubo Sportsbook launched in New Jersey in September, just ahead of the NFL season, and they signed a marketing deal with the New York Jets, who, of course, they play their games technically in New Jersey. But the Jets sued Fubo in November, saying Fubo agreed to pay a $12.4 million deal in sponsorship fees over a 5-year term, and then failed to pay the first $1.2 million that was due on October 1st. And like I said, now they're suing Fubo. Fubo is claiming that because the sports book, the game company is defunct, that you shouldn't owe that. But the Jets are saying, well, the parent company is still very much in business, and these should be on the hook for that. So, what were your thoughts on those marketing deals?
Yeah. So to take the Houston one first, the Dynamo are just going to sell that again, or I should say, Fubo is just going to sell that to someone else. So if sports betting goes live, like they'll have a buyer lined up for that. So shouldn't be a ton of money lost there on Fubo's front. But yeah, on the Jets deal, Fubo's in big trouble. Like I'd be stunned if a judge doesn't say like the parent company owes that money, especially when they're a going concern, aka an actual business. So yeah, I mean, again, like people act as if getting into the sports betting space is just like so easy. And and we'll talk about fanatics in the next segment, but I think they bit off more than they could chew. I'm not a huge fan of Fubo to begin with, like the streaming app. So like, I've talked to multiple people who are really close to this situation. One of the large issues was all of the lion's share of Fubo's subscribers to their streaming app were in one state, aka New York. And to think that you're going to dominate any state besides New York is a pipe dream. And then they didn't even get a New York license. So it's like, if the idea is we're going to convert all these users for free onto a sports betting app, well, A, all of your users are in one state, and then B, you didn't even get a license for that state. So there was just a lot of flaws with this model. And we see it all the time. I mean, this is not the only casualty. We won't name names in this episode, but there's a few other books that I do not understand what their strategy is, and they are throwing a ton of cash at this problem. So, yeah, I wish they had succeeded. We, at PropSwap, we want as many primary operators to succeed. So we're certainly rooting for them, but in this situation, it just didn't turn out that well.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about this, just talking about the streaming business, I think there was a point in time where they had a really good business, and because people were cutting their cable subscriptions and they needed somewhere to turn to find live sports without a cable subscription, and the big networks were slow to move on this, but they've quickly realized this, and I think as time goes on and some of these league deals, the broadcasting rights go up, like the NBA deal is going to be up soon. I think they're gonna, Disney's gonna ask for more streaming rights. I think these broadcast companies are going to be able, make it way more accessible to stream these live sports. YouTube TV's obviously come in, so the Fubo business in general, I think trending in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
But when one door closes, another one opens. You mentioned it. You stepped on it earlier. Number 3 is the launch of Bet Fanatics, which, of course, is a arm of the Fanatics company, which sells jerseys and sport, clothing for all the different major sports leagues. It's ran by a guy named Michael Rubin. Rubin hired the former FanDuel CEO, Matt King, who was extremely integral in bringing FanDuel into the legal sports betting space and helped it make it the number 1 market leader. Earlier this year, Rubin said that their plan is to launch the online sportsbook in 15 to 20 states by the fall of 2023. I believe Ohio will be their first one. Maryland, they acquired the rights to do retail and online there as well. I think those will be 2 of the first ones you see them in, but 15 to 20 by the end of next year is a lot. And last but of course not least, the company recently raised $700 million at a $31 billion company valuation. Now, not all of that money is going to go to sports betting, but Rubin did say that part of that $700 million would be earmarked for their launch into sports betting. I put this at number 3 because the Fanatics is the elephant in the room in terms of sports betting, right? I mean, FanDuel and DraftKings are by far and away the market leader, but when you look at those 2 companies' valuations versus a $31 billion valuation of Fanatics, it has a lot of people asking, is Fanatics going to come in and take a top spot away from FanDuel or DraftKings?
Yeah. It's a lot to unwrap there. The pros of Fanatics, I would say, are the team. Mike Rubin's a smart guy. I've chatted with him a couple times at a Super Bowl and also the Chicago NBA All-Star game a few years ago. I'm impressed. We have some mutual friends in Philadelphia. He's, of course, no longer a stockholder of the Philadelphia 76ers, HBSE. Harris Blitzer, who owns the Sixers and the Devils, but he called himself like an owner. Josh Harris owns the Sixers. He started Apollo. And then David Blitzer, which is where Harris Blitzer in the HB of SE comes from. So, but regardless, successful guy. He started RSI. He sold that business to eBay. Then he bought back Rulala, I want to say Guilt, and then RSI, which is basically what Fanatics became. So he's a smart guy. Like, no doubt about it. I trust his judgment. I think he gets it. He's a very social guy. He posts a new NBA player every 2 days on his Instagram, whether it's Joel Embiid or Harden, or he's friends with Jay-Z, he's friends with Meek Mill. Like, very connected, very smart. He's a hustler. Been doing this for a long time, and like, good combination of like kind of nerdy business geek, but also a social guy. So love him as a business person. Matt King, really impressive guy. Well, obviously, he was at FanDuel. There's 2 other executives that we know very well at Fanatics that I'm impressed by. So from the team perspective, I like the team, but from a lot of other angles, I don't like this company. I think the actual business is terrible. The merch, it generally stinks. I've made 2 or 3 purchases on Fanatics. They've all been garbage. They shrink. They're way smaller than I thought they were going to be. It's way less quality than I thought it was going to be compared to like Amazon or Lululemon or Viore, all these other upstarts that I enjoy shopping online. I hated shopping online with Fanatics. They charge you for returns. Who does that these days? So a lot of problems with the main business. But then going on to the sports betting side, like the idea that we're going to transition all of these Fanatics users seamlessly onto sports betting is false. Like, I disagree with that leap on how, because I bought a t-shirt on Fanatics 4.5 years ago because I'm a Bulls fan, I'm going to convert that person onto a sports betting app 4.5 years later. Now, like, if the idea is there's these really intense Fanatics users who like buy sports merch all the time and they're going to convert those people in the Fanatics sports betting app, like, okay, maybe. But like the Fanatics brand has like all these disparate websites that they run. There's like Fans Edge and Fans Unite and all these different apparel brands that are just like powered by Fanatics. So it's not like everyone's on the same site. So like if everyone was on the same site and you just like threw a tab in there and said, hey, come bet on sports, like that's a different discussion. But like, I just don't see the easy transition from Fanatics users to sports betting users. And then the last point would be, this was the argument. People still to this day think this is why DraftKings and FanDuel were successful. I completely disagree with that. I, for example, never played DFS. The idea was,
just to be clear, you're saying the database of customers that they acquired in the DFS business was the number one reason why they became the market leaders in sports betting.
Yes, that's the assumption, and I completely disagree with that. I, along with many of my other friends, never played DFS, but when I was living in New Jersey, when sports betting got legalized, I saw DraftKings and/or FanDuel on every NBA court, inside of every NFL stadium, doing deals with all the NHL teams, like all over the place. This company was the tech brand that I trusted, that once sports betting came to my state, like, yeah, I'm going to give those two guys a shot first. They were great apps, and then they kept me. So, I just gave them a shot because they had such a broad sports marketing exposure. Fanatics doesn't have that. Like they say they do. They're like, yeah, we spent a lot of money with the Sixers or whatever team. Like, I don't see those deals. Like, certainly not to the level that FanDuel or DraftKings spend with those teams. So, again, like I said with Mattress Mac and Fubo, like I'm rooting for them. I like the team. I like that company. You better come with cash, meaning don't think that like this conversion of users is going to be like cost you like $5, because it's not. You better come with 500. That's 700 million. And even at that, say that's 10 states and they spend 500 million on advertising, 50 million a state. Like, we know how quickly that can go. 50 million per state is not that much.
Yeah. So a lot said there. But yeah, if the ranking is done by the most personable CEO, I think just give Fanatics the top spot right now, right?
Big fan.
I disagree slightly in the sense of that I think a lot of the success of FanDuel and DraftKings was based on their database, but I think a database full of daily fantasy players is a lot more valuable than a database of people who buy jerseys, right? Like a lot of people who bought their Christmas gifts on Fanatics aren't actually sports fans. They're just buying things for the kid or the sports fan in their life. But the other thing I'll say is that FanDuel and DraftKings, way more so than MGM and Caesars, had experience in accepting online payments. And I think that cannot be overlooked. I think there's something to be said where people being comfortable putting their credit card in their site and the company having experience in wanting to know, and how that process works. The wallets, the digital online experience of giving someone your money. Whereas MGM and Caesars, their experience was in-person cash. That was their main experience in terms of how they collect the money, not so much online. So I agree with you in the sense that I think people are overstating the value of the Fanatics database, but I do think if there were to be a company that could overtake FanDuel, DraftKings, or at least give them run for their money, it would be this company. However, I think the switching costs are so high that it's going to be an extremely uphill battle for them to do that. But like you said, I'm rooting for them, and I think we will learn a lot this time next year. Moving on, the second biggest story of 2022 in the gambling world has to be the stock market decline of these gambling companies. The way that investors and markets treated gambling companies in 2021 could not have been more different than they were treated in 2022. And now, look, I realize that stocks as a whole, markets as a whole, were down this year compared to 2021, but gambling companies especially, I think, were hit hard. I'm just going to rattle off a couple numbers. This is year to date on some of these public companies. DraftKings down 58%, MGM down 26%, Caesars down 54%, Flutter, which is the parent company of FanDuel, down 13%, and then another story that I think was indicative of the markets for gambling companies this year. in September 2021, Endeavor, which owns UFC, if I'm not right, if I'm not mistaken, and you know, a talent agency that owns UFC, they agreed to buy OpenBet, which was an arm of a company, Scientific Games, that basically was the platform, sportsbook platform for many big sportsbooks. Endeavor agreed to buy OpenBet for $1.2 billion in September 2021. Then in June, Endeavor slashed that price by $400 million, and the final sale price was $800 million. And that's still a lot of money, but I mean, to slash something by 33%, I think is very indicative. However, and then the last thing I'll say is our friend Chris Grove, who follows this industry, he was quoted as saying, quote, 2022 was the year when markets aggressively overcorrected. The market is massive on a per capita basis and regulation is rolling out. The opportunity is fundamentally stronger now than it was in 2021. And so, Luke, I'll turn to you. Obviously, you cover this very closely. Why was this the second biggest story of 2022?
Yeah, I mean, look, the market leader, second market leader in DraftKings being off nearly 60% in a year, like that's a butt kicking. So it's a huge story. It impacts fundraising, fundraising impacts marketing spend impacts decision making impacts the players. You know, so I thought there would be more ejection of sharps inside books because they were like, at the beginning, like this started last December. I mean, the market started to tick down early December, late December 2021. Most of January, it started to tick down. So this has been going on for almost a year. So I actually thought that a lot more books were going to be way stricter in, kicking out sharp players and limiting sharp players. So I still think that could happen more going into next year, just because these companies are now more focused on profitability than growth. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate situation for PropSwap, for startups that, didn't have a giant balance sheet to start with. We certainly would have loved to raise more money this year. I know that we're not the only ones who are saying that are in the ecosystem. Look at Tesla. Tesla's off 64% this year, and they were the most valuable company in the world at the beginning of 2022. So it's not just sports betting. It's the whole market. So I agree with Chris. This country is $100 billion country. $100 million was wagered on sports this year in 2022 and legally. So the market's great. I think, and for the most part, sports betting is generally recession proof. There's certainly, there might be a small subset of gamblers who are, might take some chips off the table or gamble less. But for the most part, like, people are still enjoying their sports. They're still throwing some bucks on NFL weekends and, parlays, as we've seen on NFL Sunday. So the opportunity is still there. But, when DraftKings is off by 60%, which is what a lot of investors peg us to when we're having those those conversations, it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah. It was never in my best interest to talk about this in 2021 when DraftKings was at these all-time highs, but you looked at that company valuation, and I've been in this business for over a decade, and I just would tell people, I'm like, look, like, I don't think you realize how small margin of a business sports betting is. And I would also talk about that when states were saying how much money they were going to get in tax revenue, and I would say, look, you're getting basically a percentage of a percentage, and it's really not that big. However, it is something that is not going away. This is not an industry that I think is subject to a recession or to fraud like we saw with FTX, because it's so highly regulated. Like, you're not going to see a company just that got that has sports betting licenses. They're just not going to disappear and not give people their money back, right? It's like, it's not subject to those types of things. So I do agree with Chris that there was an overcorrection. Like, it's, where else could you see something where the TAM, the total addressable market, is growing, but yet the valuations are going down? So I do agree that I think this will turn around. I think people, they just got a little tight with their purse strings. And yeah, profitability became a huge thing. DraftKings said from the get-go that they were going to lose money. They were going to spend, $1 billion a year in marketing. They proceeded to spend $1 billion in marketing, lose money like they said they would, and then all of a sudden everyone freaked out. It's like, this is what they said they were going to do, right? So that always kind of confuses me when they do the thing they said. People loved it at the time, and then the results come out and people hated it.
Yeah, it's last thing just on the whole stock market, just economy in general. Like, for the most part, there isn't anything fundamentally wrong right now. Like 2020 was, of course, COVID, and then we had a real estate bubble in 2008, and then the year 2000 was tech. Like, those were huge fundamental problems with the economy. Like, we're not really having that right now. Inflation's a problem for sure. Like, we need to curb inflation. That's soaring prices for everything is not good for anyone. But in actual X's and O's of the economy, we're not in a terrible position. So I'm hopeful we can turn around next year. Yeah, definitely, Jeff Bezos and many other much smarter people than I have been if you can, take a few chips off the table. And I know that we've certainly made a few of those tough decisions this year. So hopefully we'll get back on track next year. But the global economy is not in a beautiful place. I know there's really high energy costs overseas. So hopefully we can kind of curb all that and curb inflation and get back to a strong economy early next year.
Yeah. Long term, I think sports betting is one of the most solid industries, and it's something that's just going to keep growing. So I'm also hopeful that the decline was a 2022 thing, and it's not something that we will be seeing for the next several years to come. But that brings us to our number one story of the year. Drum roll, please. Has to be California voting no on sports betting in the November ballot. It is obviously the largest state in the U.S., and it was a resounding no. So just to give you some backstory, I know we've talked about this previously on the podcast, but there were two different prop questions that California voters were faced with. One was Prop 26, which basically said you had to make your sports bets in person at the tribal casinos, and that bill was, or that question was obviously backed by the casinos. And then Prop 27 was for online only sports betting. That was, of course, backed by FanDuel, DraftKings, Fanatics, a couple other companies as well, and they both were voted down in November. Both sides spent over a combined $400 million, with the vast majority of that going towards TV advertising. And one of the most interesting parts of this thing was that the tribes spent their money not to say vote yes on Prop 26, but to say vote no on Prop 27. It's something I've said for years, that the tribes have this attitude of either we can only have sports betting or no one can have sports betting, right? They would rather no one have it than them have to compete with FanDuel and DraftKings and those other companies. It's honestly astonishing that this failed. I thought this would have been a guarantee that at least one. I mean, we were talking about what happens if they both pass. Then what happens, right? That was a serious question we were asking, and we could not have been more wrong about this. And this was just such a power play from the tribes. I think after this, people like Jason Robbins and the CEOs of the other companies, they must have had their tail between their legs saying, wow, we just got absolutely worked in California. It was, like I said, such a power move to show the strength that these tribes have in California, and the fact that the voters listen to the tribes. Ryan Butler, who we had the podcast, talked about just how integral some of these tribes are in their communities. They give lots of jobs, and if these say they're against something, then they'll vote with them. So, Luke, what was your takeaway from this story?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time out there in Southern California. Mostly, you couldn't turn on the TV without seeing one of these ads. So, I agree with you. The tribes definitely flexed their muscles. They flexed it with cash by basically buying up TV ads. That's what their strategy was. And it just, literally, like, I am in the industry. I know exactly how this industry operates and how other states have done this. I was confused by the TV ads. Like, if I'm confused, like, the general voter is, of course, going to be confused at, like, if I vote for retail, then can I also vote for mobile? Is it mutually exclusive? Can they both pass?
Just to cut you off for a second, and I'll let you continue. But just an important note, I think, and Ryan Butler talked about this. The Prop 27, the one backed by the online sports books, their strategy was to talk about how this money was going to help the homeless, right? That all the revenue from the sports betting would go to homelessness, and they really tried to, force that down the people's throats, saying, help the homelessness. And I think that's what the commercials were doing, was like saying, hey, like, vote to help the homeless. And everyone kind of found that disingenuous to say, no, this is DraftKings and FanDuel. Stop trying to make it seem like this is something to help the homeless. So I assume that's kind of where the confusion is. Like, it's like the messaging was just off, right?
That was another part of confusion for sure, is that 27, which is who was backed by FanDuel, DraftKings, Barstool, that was pushing, like, let's solve homelessness. So that was also confusing. But I'm simply saying, like, I got so many text messages from people in California saying, which one should I vote for? Like, I don't know what to do. Please help me decipher which prop is better. It was just a complete cluster F, and voters were just totally confused. So 27 did a bad job explaining it, because these friends of ours, like, they of course know what DraftKings and FanDuel are in all these other states, and all these other states have had it for so long. Like, they just want that to happen. But then, like, the tribes came and flexed their spending muscle by advertising during every single Monday Night Football game incessantly, like, hey, don't vote for that, vote for this, and then you can only bet on premise at our casino. So it completely confused the voter. Very annoying for us. We, of course, wanted it to pass. And yeah, I mean, just goes to show that logic does not always prevail in politics. And even the FOMO argument we use all the time, like, all these other states are getting it, so California should want it. It doesn't always work out like that.
Yeah. And I'll just reiterate that number again. Over $400 million spent, with a lot of that going just towards TV commercials, and we are in a no different place today than we were a couple months ago, and $400 million was spent. I almost wonder, we just talked about these stocks. Like, I think that also kind of hurt it too. I think if California, 40 million people had access to sports betting, I think you would have seen maybe a bump in some of those stocks. But the sports books are going to have to go back to the drawing board. We've talked to people in the industry, and they're going to have to. I think they realized that they thought they could win this battle against the tribes, and they found out the hard way, the expensive way, that they're going to lose. So I think they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and come back with a plan that the tribes sign off on. Like, they can't just go up against them. They're going to have to come to the bargaining table and come up with a plan that they can both agree with. But again, we just talked about how there's not as much money as you would think. So I also have a hard time believing there's going to be a plan they come up with where the tribes are happy, the sports books are happy, the state is happy. Right. As Ryan Butler talked about the podcast, like, if you talk about California's, huge total state budget, the tax revenue is a drop of the bucket for that. So I don't know what they're going to come up with, but it's got to be something that they agree to before they bring it to the voters, because they cannot go through another situation where they spend $400 million on a loser.
Yeah. Yeah. I never understood why we couldn't increase the amount of money that the tribes ask for to do a market access agreement. Like, for example, Full House Resorts in Indiana, very small brick and mortar casinos in rural Indiana. They sold their market access, their mobile market access in the state of Indiana for like $8 million to win. And, obviously California would be orders of magnitude larger than that. So I just, there has to be a number, in my opinion, where the brick and mortar casinos, Pachanga is like a big one in near San Diego. Pachanga says, okay, DraftKings, you owe me $200 million to run your mobile app in the state of California. and that's separate from California licensing. That's separate from the state. Like DraftKings, you have to pay Pechanga $200 million. Pechanga's happy, DraftKings is happy, like, and of course the state license fee still exists. And maybe that number is too large, but whatever the number is, whether it's 200 million or 100 million, like there has to be a number that makes everyone happy, I would think.
Right. So FanDuel and DraftKings and those companies, their strategy was, so to be clear, they proposed an online license fee of $100 million per sports book, but that money was going to go towards the state. And I think their strategy was, that money goes towards the state. That money is earmarked for homelessness. That will get people on our side, and we are going to cut the tribes out. I think they thought we want no part of these tribes. And $100 million each. Let's say there's 10 sports books. That's $1 billion going towards the state. They thought, I think that would garner enough goodwill. They tried to cut out the tribes, and they're going to have to come back with a plan that says, okay, tribes get the license, and then we'll buy the license from the tribes. But in that scenario you laid out, where's the state come in, right? They're going to have to pay. They're going to have to pay the tribes for the license, and then the state's going to get, like I said, 10% of revenue, and what's that really going to do? So, these are all problems that are, that other people are going to have to figure out. But unfortunately, I think we are in. There's going to be at least another 2 to 4 years. We're going to have to wait for this. So really a shame. Like you said, we were rooting for sports betting, at least one of these things to pass. And just another situation where everyone's kind of losing, and except for the bookies, right? I guess the California bookies are still winning in this. So just an absolute crazy story that, like I said earlier, I would have wagered a lot of money to say that California would have voted yes on this, because we just know so many people who want this, right? But regardless, we'll see what happens with that. But that will wrap it up. What a crazy year it's been. Just an industry that's constantly growing. I think 2023 will be another huge year. States like Ohio, Massachusetts will be launching very shortly. More, hopefully Florida turns it around, and we shall see. So any closing remarks before we sign off for until the new year?
Yeah, there could just be a really big long shot that goes to the NBA Finals, like the Boston Celtics, and a really big long shot in a big sports city like the Philadelphia Phillies. If that could just happen every year, I'm happy. But yeah, awesome. I mean, the sports calendar played exactly like we wanted to. Crazy underdog story, gets to the championship, loses. Phillies did that. Celtics did that. A ton of people sold their tickets at PropSwap. We loved it. Of course, the buyers at the time got the best prices in the country on both the Phillies and Celtics, so they won as well, or at least saved some cash on that sports bet. Another World Cup was really successful, and here we are at the NFL, where there's been a very topsy-turvy football season as well, with teams going up and down. And the sports has found exactly what we wanted to happen. I wish the stock market would follow suit. Hopefully it happens.
You left out the biggest one. The biggest one was the Bengals. That was the biggest. That was the biggest PropSwap story of
every sport
of 2022. So we'll. Fingers crossed for another Bengals story in this NFL playoffs. Enjoy the bowl games. Enjoy the college football playoffs. We will talk to you next week.